The keys felt heavier than they should have in Mikhail's palm as he stood before the wrought iron gates of his father's estate. 3 months since the funeral, and he'd finally worked up the nerve to make the drive from Bucharest to this forgotten corner of the Carpathians. The lawyer had been insistent about settling the inheritance quickly, though Mikhail couldn't imagine why anyone would be eager to claim this crumbling monument to his family's peculiar obsession with isolation. The gate shrieked open on rusted hinges, and gravel crunched beneath his rental car's tires as he wound up the tree-lined drive. Ancient oaks pressed close on either side, their branches forming a tunnel that filtered the late afternoon sun into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. When the house finally came into view, Mikhail had to brake harder than intended. It was worse than the photographs the estate agent had sent. 3 stories of gray stone rose from overgrown grounds, its Gothic windows staring down like hollow eyes. Ivy crawled across the facade in thick veins, and several roof tiles had slipped free, leaving dark gaps that suggested deeper rot within. The whole structure seemed to lean slightly forward, as if the house itself was eager to collapse and be done with whatever burden it carried. Mikhail parked near the front steps and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. He'd grown up in London, raised by his mother after she'd fled Romania when he was barely walking. His father had been nothing more than monthly letters and Christmas cards signed Dragos Vintila in careful script. Now, at 32, he was heir to this place that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The front door opened with surprising ease. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light that streamed through tall windows. The entrance hall stretched ahead, its black and white checkered floor leading to a grand staircase that curved upward into shadow. Everything was draped in white sheets, ghostly furniture shapes that made the space feel like a funeral parlor. Mikhail's footsteps echoed as he explored the ground floor, pulling away sheets to reveal mahogany tables and leather armchairs, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors whose dark eyes seemed to track his movement. The kitchen was surprisingly modern, though a layer of dust suggested it hadn't been used in months. A study lined with leather-bound books contained a massive oak desk, its surface clear except for a single envelope bearing his name in his father's familiar handwriting. Inside, the letter was brief and typically cryptic. Mikhail, if you are reading this, then the responsibility has passed to you as it passed to me from my father, and to him from his father before. In the basement, you will find a door that must never be opened. It has been sealed for 200 years, and it must remain so. Guard it well. Trust no one who asks you to break the seal, no matter what they promise. The woman Ileana will explain what I cannot put in words. Find her in the village. She will help you understand what our family owes to the world. Do not fail in this, my son. The consequences would be beyond imagining. Mikhail read the letter twice, then set it aside with a shake of his head. Even in death, his father couldn't speak plainly. A door that must never be opened. It sounded like something from a fairy tale, the sort of melodrama his mother had always said drew her to Dragos in the first place, before she realized how exhausting it was to live with someone who treated every conversation like a scene from a Gothic novel. Still, curiosity pulled him toward the narrow door at the back of the kitchen that he'd assumed led to a pantry. Instead, stone steps descended into darkness. He found a light switch, and bare bulbs flickered to life, illuminating rough-hewn walls that wept moisture. The basement was larger than he'd expected, stretching beneath most of the house's footprint. Old wine racks lined one wall, though most of the bottles were gone or too covered in dust and cobwebs to read their labels. At the far end, set into the stone wall, was a door unlike anything else in the house. It was made of black iron, its surface inscribed with symbols that looked older than Christianity. heavy chains wrapped around it multiple times, secured with 3 separate padlocks that showed no signs of rust despite the basement's dampness. But it was the sound that made Mikhail's skin crawl, a low humming that seemed to come from the metal itself, rising and falling like breathing. He approached slowly, one hand extended. The humming grew louder, and he could swear he felt warmth radiating from the door despite the basement's chill. Just as his fingertips were about to brush the iron surface, a voice called down from above. "You shouldn't touch it." Mikhail spun around, heart hammering. A woman stood at the top of the stone steps, backlit by the kitchen light, so he couldn't make out her features clearly. She descended slowly, her footsteps careful on the worn stone. "Who are you? How did you get in?" "I'm Ileana Popescu." She stepped into the light, and Mikhail saw she was perhaps his age, with dark hair pulled back and intelligent brown eyes that seemed too knowing for comfort. "Your father mentioned me in his letter, I assume, and I got in the same way I always have. Your family's never been much for locking doors against friends." "Friends?" Mikhail gestured toward the iron door. "Do friends usually explain mysterious sealed basements?" Ileana's smile was sad rather than amused. "In your family's case, yes. My grandmother helped your grandfather maintain the seals. My mother aided your father when his time came. Now it's our turn, it seems." "Seals? You mean there's more than one?" "7, originally. This is the last." She moved closer to the door, though she was careful not to touch it. The others failed over the decades, sometimes gradually, sometimes all at once. Each time we managed to contain what escaped, but it cost us. My great-aunt died, closing the 3rd seal in 1954. My cousin lost his mind, dealing with what came through the 5th in 1987. The humming from the door grew louder, and Mikhail could swear he heard something else beneath it. Whispering, perhaps, too faint to make out words, but unmistakably urgent. What's behind it? Something that was old when Rome was young. Something that feeds on despair and grows stronger with each soul it claims. Ileana's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. Your ancestor, Vasile Dragos, was the one who first bound it in 1823. It had been loose for 3 years, turning whole villages into empty shells. The people would just stop. They'd stand in their fields or sit at their tables until they starved, listening to whatever it whispered to them. This is insane. But even as Mikhail said it, he could feel the pull of the thing behind the door. It wasn't quite a voice, more like a presence pressing against his thoughts, offering wordless promises of rest, of an end to worry and struggle, and the weight of making decisions. You can't seriously expect me to believe. I don't expect anything, Ileana said quietly. But look at the chains. Look at how they've never rusted. Look at the way your pulse quickened the moment you saw the door. You feel it, don't you? The way it calls to you. Mikhail wanted to deny it, but the pull was getting stronger. Part of him wanted to find bolt cutters, to snap the chains and see what lay beyond the iron. What harm could there be in just looking? As if reading his thoughts, Ileana stepped between him and the door. That's exactly what it wants you to think. Every guardian goes through this. The whispers start the moment you're alone with it. They'll get worse each night until the full moon. When's the full moon? 4 days. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. What happens then? The seal weakens. It always does during the full moon, but it's been getting worse each time. My mother said your father barely managed to reinforce it last month. She thinks we have maybe 2 or 3 more full moons before it fails completely. And then? Then what happened in 1820 happens again. But this time, there are motorways and aeroplanes and mobile phones to help spread the despair faster than Vasile could ever have imagined. Mikhail ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what he was hearing. So what am I supposed to do? Stay here forever, making sure a door stays locked? That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Ileana's voice was gentle but firm. It's what every Dragos has done for 200 years. It's why your father never left this place for more than a few days at a time. It's why he could never be the father you needed him to be. But I have a life in London, a job, friends, and they'll have to understand. She moved toward the steps. Or they won't, and you'll learn to live with that like your father did, like your grandfather did. The thing behind that door doesn't care about your convenience, Mikhail. It just waits and grows patient and whispers to anyone foolish enough to listen. As they climbed back to the kitchen, Mikhail could still hear the humming behind them. It seemed to follow them up the steps, a sound like distant music that made his chest ache with longing for something he couldn't name. How do I reinforce the seal? The words came out before he'd consciously decided to ask them. Ileana paused at the kitchen door. Blood. And intent, mostly. A bit of the old Latin. It's not pleasant, but it works. Your father managed it alone for 30 years. And if I refuse, then I'll do my best to hold it until the seal breaks completely. After that, she shrugged. After that, it won't matter what either of us wanted. The thing will be free, and the world will have to learn to live with the consequences. If it can. The sun was setting by the time Ileana left, promising to return the next morning with supplies and more detailed explanations. Mikhail stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the silence of the old house settling around him. Except it wasn't quite silence. From somewhere below, barely audible, came the persistent hum of the sealed door. He tried watching television on an old set he found in the sitting room, but the channels were mostly static. He attempted to read one of his father's books, but the words seemed to shift on the page, rearranging themselves into patterns that hurt his eyes. Eventually, he gave up and climbed to the second floor, finding a bedroom that had clearly been his father's. The bed was made with military precision, and a photograph on the nightstand showed a younger Dragos standing beside a woman Mikhail didn't recognize. Both looked serious, almost grim, as if they knew something terrible was approaching just outside the camera's frame. As midnight approached, the humming from the basement grew louder. Mikhail lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and found himself thinking about London. His flat in Shoreditch, his job at the architectural firm, Sarah, whom he'd been meaning to ask out for months. All of it felt distant now, like memories from someone else's life. The whispers started just after 1 in the morning. They weren't words exactly, more like suggestions that bypassed his ears entirely and spoke directly to the part of his mind that was always tired, always worried about money or deadlines, or whether he was wasting his life on things that didn't matter. The presence behind the door offered rest from all of that. Peace. An end to the constant struggle of being human in a world that demanded so much and gave back so little. Mikhail found himself sitting up in bed, then standing, then walking toward the door, without quite deciding to do any of those things. He made it halfway down the main staircase before he caught himself, gripping the banister hard enough to leave marks in the old wood. "Not tonight," he said aloud, his voice echoing in the empty house. "Not yet." But as he climbed back to bed, he could feel the thing's amusement following him like smoke. It had all the time in the world, and it knew exactly how patient it could afford to be. 3 more nights until the full moon. 3 more nights to decide whether he was strong enough to accept the burden his bloodline had carried for 2 centuries, or whether the world would have to face whatever his ancestor had been wise enough to bind in darkness and iron. The whispers continued until dawn, and by the time the sun rose over the Carpathians, Mikhail Dragos understood exactly what kind of inheritance his father had left him. The only question now was whether he had the strength to claim it.